Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a discussion on a very serendipitous thing. Namely, we got a bit more information when it came to Tactics Ogre Reborn when they were going and talking about the Evolus Chronicles, because there were a few bits of information that either might have potentially not been translated to English properly, or potentially might have been stuff that was translated in some weird way, or maybe, who knows. I honestly, genuinely have absolutely no idea what happened there as far as why this information was missing before. But at any rate, let's go ahead and talk about the development of Tactics Ogre as it relates to the Evolus Chronicles. Namely, we got this little happy tweet from Mr. Matsuno over here. So, just like with Tactics Ogre Wheel of Fate, there were no resources available for the original work of this work either. Which is news to me despite covering this thing obsessively for years. I knew that there were bits and pieces that were missing. I had no idea that they were actually rebuilding it from scratch. I think at one point there was one translation mentioning that they had to redo a lot of stuff from scratch, but I assumed that meant like kind of the same way that the One Vision mod was designed, where essentially all of the pieces were taken out and plugged back in a different way, and potentially retooled across the board, because there are signs that they had the PSP version there. I don't think this translation's accurate either, to be completely honest, because there are signs of mechanics that the PSP version had, signs that they maybe were going for more of a direct remake before, only to then realize, you know what, we shouldn't do that at all. So, I mean specifically things like when we had the holy water item. So this is an item that, again, the One Vision overhaul ended up adding first, and then we ended up seeing added in Tactics Ogre Reborn. The reason that I mentioned this in particular is because it's one of a couple of nods to the mod in particular, and I've heard through the grapevine that there were people on the development staff that, were One Vision players. Now, the reason that I mention this in context is because we wound up with this perfect scenario where we had two perfectly opposing branches that didn't conflict with each other, that gave us the two sort of like perfect opposing visions of what this game could be. Okay? More on that in a little bit of a second here, but the point is, when it came to that exorcism juice, originally, it was called Grimoire Exorcism, the same as just using the spellbook item in the PSP version. Leading to the obvious conclusion of like, hey, they just reworked the old Grimoire system. If they reworked the old Grimoire system, then they put all of the old spells in, presumably. So, a little bit of an odd thing there. We had a few odds and ends that seemed like it was a more direct remake at one point, and then potentially either pivoted or they didn't have that stuff, or who knows. Genuinely, no clue. I personally like to think that they were starting to do a more direct remake. They got partway through, they took a look at something like OV, and they're like, you know what? We will never be able to remake it to that level. No amount of resources, no amount of people will get us to that level that this thing that's been worked on for years will get us to. We will always look bad if we try to go down that route. You know what? Board game time. This series came from board games. We will make it into a board game. We will make it into this whole thing that flows like water. And sure enough, they pulled it off. Anyway, continuing on. So, although a development ROM remained, allowing us to recover the graphics from it, the PSP being a different hardware platform meant that the program and data had to be almost entirely rebuilt from scratch. The same applied to the development tools. In other words, having set up the development environment to that extent, it became possible to expand with new maps and new events. Which is kind of the cool thing here. Because Tactics Ogre didn't start on the PSP at all, despite what many people seem to think, being a situation where, again, it released alongside the original Final Fantasy Tactics. It came first. It's where FFT came from. And in that particular respect, it's essentially going to be where, again, we see a lot of those same plot points made. However, when they remade it with the official version, Reborn here, the focus was on the adaptive narrative. So, for FFT fans, essentially the way we can directly translate this is just imagine if that battle with Algus at the very, very start there, instead of a choice of would you like easy mode and hard mode at the cost of more or less bravery, instead what you have is a situation where if you decide not to save him, it's not going to give you a game over. He's just dead, and the story adapts from there. That instead of him going and asking for soldiers, maybe it's Delita's idea, and maybe that leads him down a path to be a bit more radical in his character down the road. Maybe having Algus there softens him up so that he becomes more of the good guy that we end up seeing over the course of the playthrough there. Maybe if you end up going and siding with Algus a bit more, it causes him to be a bit, too kind of radicalized in the other direction, potentially turning him into something more of a Weegraph type character. Like maybe you would have had this kind of secondary thing where he is essentially playing the role of these other characters, and that's what Tactics Ogre is about, because that's what we saw with somebody like Vice in this particular game, where no matter what, due to the fact that his kind of background motivation is that he wants to get with the main character's sister, he is quietly plotting in the background to just absolutely murder your ass whenever possible. He pretends to be your friend, but at every opportunity he will be opposed to you. He will pick whatever the opposite is of whatever it is you do, and ultimately, even if you guys end up reconciling and he ends up joining your team, you can tell he's basically just a checked out shadow of his former self. Something is clearly broken in the guy for him to finally chill out and let go of this whole scenario. Anyway, that's besides the point. That's kind of outside of the scope of this particular video. But that is Tactics Ogre. It is a game that is all about strategic chaos. It's not meant to be one where you have one character that's built to be insanely powerful and killing everything in your way, being this unstoppable machine because you did the ultimate build. It's a case where every character is supposed to provide their little bit to the team, and at any point can tragically be killed. Effectively like a medieval XCOM is what we're looking at here, with a really, really, really interesting adaptive narrative, okay? So in this particular instance, if a character is killed, if their health reaches 0, they are simply dead, on the spot, for all intents and purposes, no real comebacks. Technically, you do get the Revivify spell from certain rare encounters later on in the game. You only get a copy or two, depending on your playthrough. And if, for example, your cleric is ever killed and turned into an angel, your copy of that spell is going to be gone. So essentially, you have this situation where if you are playing a sort of, play it as it lays kind of rule set, as it's implied that you should, the end result is that you have the situation where death is sort of just an ongoing thing. You don't necessarily reset for your soldiers, you find new ones. You replace them. It's this focus on the bottom line of getting your army back to a functional state, more so than trying to save that one particular guy. But when it comes to your plot characters, this story will adapt depending on who lived or died or whatever else. In one particular case, like typically the example given for this is the boat scene, where, for example, if everybody's saved, everyone's having a grand old get together. Sistina and her two buddies are there, like, oh hey, our whole weird little like niche sub cause of another cause is safe to go be a weird thorn in everybody's butt another day, and everybody gets on their boat and they go help Denim on their way. And if Folkert or Bayan die, they'll meet up afterwards and they're like, oh, they died for the cause, they did their best. Most of us made it. If the two guys make it and Sistina doesn't, Folker pretends not to be depressed that his girlfriend just died. But they're like, no, we promised we'd help. Just stiff upper lip, all that. We're good. We're good soldiers. We're moving on. And then, if, for example, you have a situation where all three of them end up dying, even though you got to the very end of that side quest, you just have Denim and Kashua just standing on the boat and he's like, we watched them die. We did that. There's no way they did that on accident. That is entirely our fault. And she's like, nope. You can't be thinking about their death. Tragic. It sucks. We need to be thinking about us. And the kind of cold, calculating nature of all the people in the story is, again, a huge part of its appeal, a huge part of its setting. So, okay, I know that's a lot of preamble, but the point that I'm getting at here is that's what this original one was designed for. Okay, your characters are not meant to be super deep in terms of their build. They can do a lot, and you can do insane stuff with them. Good lord, you ever coughed so hard that you just almost passed out and it feels like you experienced the afterlife yourself? Holy crap. Anyway, so weirdly on-brand sicknesses aside, let's go ahead and continue on here. So, okay, when it came to your characters, you basically had like 8 slots for customization. When it came to weapons, they were less about direct power or whatever else, and more so just the options that they gave you. So, for example, if you equipped like a spear or something, its main thing wasn't, oh, this is big, heavy, super kill weapon. It's like, oh, it attacks from 2 tiles away, it attacks 2 units at once. Awesome. Lots of characters run any type of spear just to give them that capability. You get a better spear, great. You get a little bit of extra power. You get like a legendary elemental spear or what have you, great. It's slightly better than the in-store variants. Potentially, it may not even be that much of a different thing. Like, again, the attack power bonus given between a Balder Spear from the shop and the Notos, one of the 4 Wind God weapons, essentially a magical claymore handed down from the gods. is basically the same, and depending on the elements that are involved. So, like if the enemy is an opposing element and you are the matching element, then you might see a decent bit more punch off it. But still, it's not a huge deal, is the thing. Because again, you're equipping them for their capabilities for the most part. Like, you would equip those swords on somebody strong enough to be able to potentially one-shot somebody, but if they can't, you're going to want to give them something from far away, which is why stuff like spears, stuff like bows, stuff like guns are what ends up sticking out strategically in this particular entry. Okay, so the thing to take away from all of this, and ignore the whole Ogre Battle Saga thing on the very bottom. Technically, there's several other Ogre games, but for the most part, we're just talking about Tactics Ogre here today. Since all of them are going to be essentially reinterpreting that same idea in different ways, but again, that's outside of the scope of today's conversation. Now, here's the cool part. Due to this game's focus on essentially strategy and roleplay in equal measure, we get to sort of see the conflict that this genre has at a baseline, all right? Namely, that it's something that's always in constant conflict with itself. The more RPG you have, the less strategy you have. The more strategy you have, the less RPG you have. It's one of those things that the genre has always had some issue with from the very beginning. Oftentimes, this is handled by things like, character attrition, or potentially imposing limitations on how far somebody might be able to go progress, or what have you. The thing is, no matter what way you go, due to how broad of a brush it has to paint with, no matter what direction you go in, somebody's going to be upset, right? So, essentially what we see here is that if you play this game in its direct intended manner, essentially playing without really going for grinding, you may occasionally throw people into a training session like we're doing right here, for the purpose of balancing out their experience or what have you. For the most part, it's set in such a way that if you play it straightforward, you can more or less keep up with the level curve of the game. You're going to regularly lose soldiers, but you can still go and talk to the enemy at any time, and essentially attempt to convince enemy units to join your side. It's a very, very solid, like, resistance leader kind of vibe to this whole thing. You feel like the underdog if you're playing it that way. You feel like you're kind of just experiencing this brutal world, one that completely does not care about you, one that every fight could potentially be an absolute steamroll or might whoop your ass out of nowhere. But the thing is, things immediately fall apart if you try to RPG too hard in this thing. If you try to metagame it, you are going to ruin your sense of fun entirely, in almost every situation. Like, there's basically no guardrails in place stopping you from, let's say, going into training right in front of a Morka castle as you start the game, and then immediately deciding to have two soldiers whap each other back and forth upside the head, just having them engage in an endless AI-powered slap fight until both of them walk out at max level, just like an hour later or whatever. And then at that point, nothing can really stand in your way unless you run into a random battle, in which case everything will instantly kill you. So, like, it's one of these cases where they tried to fix it, but the story couldn't really scale. And the problem is, because of the fact that the weapons that you run into aren't exactly progressing anywhere, this also means that when it comes to any kind of scaling stuff in general, it doesn't quite work. Like, it doesn't quite make sense. Some things are just freakishly weak at weird points of the game. Other stuff is weirdly strong at certain points of the game, and it's just... Obviously, look, at the time, this was done on a budget of, like, hopes and dreams, and more or less done on an impossible timeline, and attempting to just sort of try something that wasn't really done that much before. Even the few times that it had been done, with stuff like Fire Emblem and Shining Force and what have you, they tried for something completely different. Like, if you wanted a modern Shining Force, since kids today probably have not played much of that series, think of something like Triangle Strategy. It's basically modern Shining Force for most purposes. It's got a lot less customization, but still. It's the same general idea. You travel around, you wander around, and then you get into fights. Now, that all said, this did lead to a crazy amount of immersion, though, if you were just essentially playing it as the underdog. This meant that you were trying out new classes all the time, and you always had an interesting story behind the people that ended up joining your team. Like, you sent your best soldier to go fight that one generic knight that's holding off near the cliff, and so you're overpowering him, you're winning every single fight, he can't really dodge your hits, but then at the last second, he pulls off a miracle block, he just parries that hit away with a shield, he runs up, he shield bashes your best guy off a cliff to his death. And now you go up and you go talk to the guy who's wounded. He's not going anywhere. He knows he's not surviving. And he joins your army. And forever you have the story of this one soldier who ended up defecting to your side to make up for the loss of your best guy. Like, the stories that this kind of setting could create were immensely solid, despite the fact that every character was functionally speaking 4 item slots, 4 skill slots. Those skill slots were basically empty most of the time. Like, almost every character that you see on this particular list right now has empty skill slots, because those skill slots were not actually skill slots as we know them now. Essentially, we're talking about a case where they are spell slots and ability slots. So, like, the dragon has their Thunder Breath as one of their slots. The witch has spells in her slots. However, even having 1 or 2 slots is already a feature for a class, because this was based off of the idea that you're making tabletop board games, like war games and whatnot, and you're making them into a video game that you can play, but it's in this fantasy setting where you have all these cool creatures and you have these cool interactions, and like you might go and, let's say, catch yourself a griffin, or not a griffin, but a cockatrice, and you go sell it to your starting castle, and now you have the means to go make any soldier fly. You know, you find these creatures that you can go sell to particular locations to give you special items. Basically, the proto poach mechanic that we saw in FFT. You have cases where the story is going to be adapting based off things you didn't even expect that you were doing. You didn't know you had a reputation. Turns out you did the whole time. And every time you go through, it feels like the tragedy is just deepened. It just feels like you messed up even harder, that you ruined this world even more. And so you go in again, trying to fix it, trying to sort out the problems that you made. And it's this endlessly repeatable cycle. Because there's really no fully happy endings for the most part. And the thing is, it's not trying to be sad about it, it's trying to be realistic about it. Because the director, the same guy that wrote Final Fantasy Tactics, used to apparently be a war correspondent at some point, and so he was writing the story in the same style. That even with the best of intentions, even with going in with the right attitude and the right goals and the right preparation and whatever else, they might just not get what they wanted in the end. You know. So either way, again, it's written in a way that is political, but it doesn't feel like realistically political. Like, it feels like the kinds of things that just sort of happen. Like, you don't really feel one way or the other in terms of it should have turned out this other way. It's just like, oh yeah, dude, shit happens. That's the story, you know? And so yeah. And again, you can even tell from the aesthetic, the sort of like little cardboard cutouts and whatever else on these units and whatnot. When you go into them, you see the little penciled in slots for where their equipment tokens go and stuff. Again, you can tell the sort of board game inspirations here. But the thing is, when they were remaking this the first time, they wanted to expand this. They wanted people to do more of that FFT thing of obsessing over their builds and remaking things and reforming this team into something that they wanted to keep in the long run. They wanted to make it sting extra hard when you lost somebody, but then also at the same time they were really worried about potentially feeling that sting from when you lost somebody. So let's get to the weird situation that is Tactics Ogre PSP. Alright, and this gets us to Tactics Ogre PSP, truly the magical Leopleurodon of SRPGs. Now, here's the thing. There were so many good intentions going into this game. Like, you can tell people poured their heart and soul into this thing. Like, they gave it their all. It landed somewhere in the stars, that's for sure, but damn, did they really try. See, they didn't want to just remake it. In fact, it's kind of funny, because looking back at the original, back at when they were going and remaking that original, it's clear at certain points that there were ideas that they wanted to go a different way. Like, for example, you can actually see in one of the trailers, the old TGS trailer for this one back in 2010. Now, this image may not seem like much for those unfamiliar, but if we zoom in on this right here real quick, like, here, let's just do one of these things. Gonna zoom in all zoomy like. Wow, that is not a useful zoom, is it? Okay, I don't know why going backwards on that one makes it zoom in better, but whatever, screw it. But what we have here is a cleric using the draconic casting animation to cast Starfall. Now, this may seem like a who possibly gives a shit to most people watching this, but the reason this is significant is because she's casting it naturally. She's not using a scroll to cast this. I'll explain that in a minute. But this essentially means that at some point, the cleric was meant to have Draconics, presumably, because they do cast Starfall immediately after this. I can't show you the actual video because then the copyright gods come down and, you just go and strike the channel or what have you. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting that, at one point they did have this, and in fact, you also see later on they have an enchantress showing up and using a throw animation when actually using a scroll. So presumably that was meant to be different, and/or they're using a throw animation when using an orb, but an orb also can't be loaded into a lobber, so I don't know what the hell she's throwing. It's unclear. The point is, though, even when it was about to be released, they were already still changing things, trying to figure out what on earth they were doing with this thing. Because, again, it's kind of. This is the one that ended up kind of falling heavy on the RPG side of that scale, less than the strategy side of the scale. And that's the big tragedy of it, because this had some of the finest kind of strategy elements. What we saw the first time, where it fell heavily on the strategy side of things, didn't have much RPG. This time, again, it's falling on the flip side of that scale. Where once again, you can technically grind past your problems, but the problem is, if you don't, you oftentimes are going to have a hard time doing anything to anything. Because they didn't really necessarily expand all of the classes as much as they kind of pulled the guts out and made you pay extra for them. So, for example, and again, I know that seems like a weirdly disingenuous take for a game that I have played thousands of hours on, but it is fairly accurate. For example, though, like, here, actually, no, let's go back to the Rogue, okay? Technically, this is a new class that was added in this version. It's a class that also didn't make it to Reborn. Funnily enough, probably because they had to go and remake a lot of things from scratch, because this thing uses a lot of weirdly specific mechanics that also completely don't work right in this PSP version either. So, yeah, it's not a surprise that it didn't make it. But what we see here is a game, or sorry, is a class whose purpose is to go steal things. Now, that already is a bit misleading, because they don't steal things like they do in FFT, because a lot of elements from this are modeled after FFT. They did kind of go back and forth a few times like that. But they actually go and they steal consumables. They steal consumables, and they steal craftables, which is not really particularly that useful. It might, by the time you get this maxed out, it can save you a few minutes on crafting, I guess. Nifty. Anyway, though, the problem is that when you look at every one of your characters, everything that they can put into their passive slots is stuff that they used to be able to just do by default. Oh, are you just improving their stats? Well, stats raise up basically uniformly across the board. You mostly raise your stats by raising somebody up through multiple classes, but the thing is, you don't have individual classes anymore. Instead, there's one class pool. So essentially, you load everybody up into one class, you level them up, you load them up into a new class, you level them up. Congratulations, you have now broken the game. Like, it's that simple. You do this to like 2 or 3 classes, and you already have a party that is freakishly stronger than pretty much anything else you'll be running into. Well, okay, so if we don't do that, what happens? Well, they're going to be coming in pretty well underpowered compared with many of the other things you'll be running into. Potentially, also, they will be falling behind the level curve, because you don't necessarily keep up with the stuff in the story in this one as much, because you're also not leveling in real time. You're leveling after the fight ends. Those experience points are then spread out throughout your entire party, so ultimately, most folks ended up figuring out that the golden spot is to basically pick 3 or 4 classes and then just run multiples of those particular classes. They keep up with the level curve, they don't end up completely breaking the thing to the point of becoming easy, and they can still sort of experiment around with stuff. Then this also comes with the other problem that you're also not experiencing a lot of the classes. Like, this is the sort of continuation of my original save file from way back in the day, and as you can see, a few classes are used, the vast majority are just never touched. And that is a bit of a downer for a game that has a freakish amount of, cool classes and whatnot. Granted, many of them didn't really bring much to the table that could be used in this particular outing. Of particular note, stuff like the Juggernaut, whose whole thing is being able to run really far. They're kind of like a mix between a berserker and a ninja kind of thing. They can move really far, and then after they attack, they can go and they can shut down the units around them. God, that's such a cool idea. It's too bad that it only has a 30% chance to work unless you use it potentially hundreds of times, and then it eventually goes up to like a 70% chance to work. But you also have to build up a meter in order to activate that skill at all. It takes time to go and activate. Those same meter points could have been used on your finishers, on your weapon, which would have just killed the thing instead of just trying to slow it down. There was a lot of stuff like this, where they had cool ideas for a class that just didn't really get a chance to be fleshed out. often including the idea of having multiple different golem types. They have 4 times the amount of golems that they did last game. Guess how much any of this matters? That's right, it doesn't at all. You effectively get one golem. You level them up as one golem class. You level them up as the next golem class. You level them up as the next golem class. You level them up as the next golem class. While they do have some slight distinctions as far as their level ups go, you do this primarily for the growths. You can do this one time, and then every golem you have beyond that is just going to be worse across the board at everything, unless you go and you farm cards. I'm hoping you can kind of see the issue with a lot of the stuff that they did with this particular outing. They swung big, they went hard on expanding mechanics, and then it face planted in terms of actually kind of wrapping things up. Every little thing that you run into, every little corner that you turn in this outing has that same problem. Where a character has a cool design to them, and then they can't make any use of it. Like, for example, the Vartan. The guy moves fast. They don't mention the fact that he technically moves far, but also spends additional time to move that distance, which tends to make him feel a lot slower than everybody else, despite him being, the fleet-footed moving guy. They forgot to mention that you're spending additional time per each tile moved in this particular entry. Everything is very piecemeal. Now, this system is one that actually was a really, really solid thing. So every piece of equipment that you carry has a certain weight to it, and additionally, every action that you take has a certain cost to it as well. So, for example, when you're swinging your melee weapon, it's in this particular case, this particular one-handed axe is 25 recovery time. If he uses his finisher moves, every one of these will have a different recovery time to go and be activated. So, essentially, using a lot of your meter-based skills is oftentimes going to be faster than using your weapon yourself. Setting up a counter isn't necessarily just for getting additional damage, it's oftentimes for speed, because you're countering in order to attack rather than spending that recovery time on your turn. You get to attack for free if it's a counter attack. There's certain classes like, let's say, warriors, which I don't believe I even used much in this particular playthrough, if at all, whose whole thing is, let's say, boosting everybody with something called vigorous attack, giving everyone a chance to guarantee the secondaries on their weapons. So, for example, let's say, who do we have with the secondary here? Do I have anyone? Well, I guess I don't really have too many of those. Okay, well, let's go look for something. I don't think the kidney spike has anything, no? Alright, there we go, you've got one. So this one has an on-hit effect. By the way, if this menu over here looks familiar, yes, this is the one that they ended up bringing into the Evilus Chronicles. This is where it came from. Anyway, so yeah, this has a chance to inflict light averse, which makes the target weaker versus light attacks on hit, okay? Now, the thing about this is that, there's a hidden effect that, for example, the warrior can use with their vigorous attack to give everybody in the area around them the chance to go guarantee their attacks. Guarantee their attacks, guarantee that it'll inflict this particular effect. That's great. It's too bad they don't mention it, and instead it just seems like a really, really overpriced ability to hit with 100%. For stuff like archers, we had a case where everyone could swear that the secondary effects on their bows were just really, really likely to hit, because you had this effect on there where, for example, let's say you had something like the siege bow, where it had a chance to bind on hit, and effectively their ability to use Tremendous Shot recharged itself every time that you shot it, because it generated more TP than it cost to actually fire. And so this meant that every single turn they're not only potentially deleting half of something's health, but pinning it to the ground. And eventually over time this turned into stuff like being able to shut stuff down entirely, to potentially mind control things. It's absurd how friggin' strong this stuff ended up getting. So, the reason that I'm mentioning this is because those are the interesting skills. Those are the ones that actually do stuff. Now, for example, let's take a look at the Valkyrie. Okay, without Strengthen, they're not doing very much with their attacks. Without the ability to put on their sword skill over here, they're basically going to be doing nothing with their weapon. It's just going to bounce off. They're going to forget, they're going to lobotomize themselves and forget how to use their weapon entirely if you don't have this equipped. If they get rid of Anatomy, it's basically the same thing as taking this off, except it's for everything. If they take off Dodge, they forget how to dodge entirely. If you take off Divine Magic, they forget that Divine Magic exists. And, for example, if you take off Field Alchemy, they can't figure out how to open up a bottle of Tylenol without going and spilling it on their shoe. So, essentially, everything that they previously could do for free, like before they could counterattack for free, before they could use every item for free, instead of augmenting an element, they were an element. And so, essentially what they took was just they took all of the features that these classes originally had, and they broke them down into a freakish amount of skills that you could go put on there. And sure, it was technically customization, but ultimately what it came down to is that you had a bunch of passives that were going and fighting each other all the time. Like, for example, Strengthen and Fortify completely nullify each other. Stuff like Spellcraft and Resistance completely nullify each other. True Strike and Dodge, True Flight and Sidestep all completely nullify each other. So ultimately, you were investing points into your skill list to get around the game's randomization to some extent. That's not exactly a completely accurate way to put it, but still, you get the idea. Most of these skills were here to let you do stuff that you could just do for free before. So it had a tendency to be kind of iffy. And on top of that, when it came to cross classing, this is something that a lot of folks insist that you could do. You can't. The few examples of this are stuff like Field Alchemy, where everybody is able to use Field Alchemy and basically learns it at the same level anyway, so who cares? But for example, stuff like Counterattack. As you go up, it doesn't matter that you learned Counterattack slightly sooner as another class. Oh no, the Berserker learned it, one level earlier than the Swordmaster. That makes so much of a difference, you guys. That's true cross-classing right there. Oh man, the Fairy learned it a little bit later than the Warrior. Oh no, write them off of the tier list. Because, yeah, ultimately you go up to the next rank. Oh, look, they couldn't learn it anyway, so they can't exactly carry it over. It's not like they unlocked new skills doing it like this. They just got them a little bit earlier. So even this was kind of a moot point. It was kind of pointless, was the thing that I'm getting at here. There was a vision here. There was a brilliance to this particular system. There was a lot of things added that had the potential to be utterly amazing, okay? The thing was, it all was too complicated and folded in on itself in very dramatic ways. It was too much. It was essentially a just tower made of toothpicks, okay? Again, a really wild swing, an attempt to bring in so many mechanics that are so easy to fall into the Mandela effect, but all of these hundreds and thousands of different mechanics, ultimately, like, how many of them are actually important to the fact that this game's all about its adaptive narrative? How much of it is in service to the fact that the story changes depending on who lives or dies? Oh, yeah, you mean it's completely counterproductive? Yeah, it is, because look at the live system up here, right? Characters now have an FFT style bleed out counter instead of dying instantly. That part's fine, but the ability to have lives, so now all of a sudden they can die multiple times. We did get one benefit of this because occasionally they'll quote the best line from FFT and say, "Oh, I blame myself and God" as they die, which they actually brought back in Reborn as well. So okay, we had that, I guess, but yeah, no, they had lives, so essentially they could be thrown off a cliff, they could bleed out, whatever else, but they could do this multiple different times, and oftentimes it was a little bit of a cop out thing that they would say, like, oh yeah, they say everyone can only die once, but not today, as they just march off the field, like. My man, you just got nuked. I don't know what to tell. I don't know how you're walking away from that. Like one of the lines is, "I kid you not, my body's in tatters. Of course I'm retreating." Like, you're in tatters. How are you retreating? You were just unable to move and fight a second ago. Why are you able to leave? So, okay. That's kind of goofy, but whatever. It's a quality of life thing, considering how many things that they want people to go and grind up. I like the fact that we actually have the live system changed to where before they would instantly die. The only means of revival were like one end game spell, or bringing somebody back as a zombie and then finding a way to replenish them from being a zombie, or carrying a blessing stone in one of their 4 item slots, which essentially shattered the item on use and brought them back on the spot. And those were very difficult to go and replace. But the thing is, on top of that, every one of your skills again demanded grinding. This is a post game file right now, and they have weapon skills that are only to the second of 8 natural ranks. Their steel skill over here is still at rank 1. They've been using it for a good chunk of the game. This goes up to a natural thing of 8, and you unlock most of its actual beneficial perks around 4. So, yeah, this stuff was slow and tedious and just took away from the experience as a whole. And if you didn't figure out stuff like putting on anatomy, if you didn't figure out stuff like strengthen, oftentimes it felt like an impossible experience. I saw many people go and completely burn out on this thing because they couldn't figure out how they were supposed to be hurting stuff whatsoever. Okay? And this is not even getting into the fact that the crafting is the kinds of stuff that was made of nightmares. Because if you go to the shop, you go to go craft something, and not only does it take, I kid you not, like if you want to make a weapon, okay, let's just find something random to make here. Like, just a basic crossbow or what have you. Like, okay, this is the most basic crossbow in the game, something that is near completely worthless to go and make. It still has a 5% chance to just burn all of these ingredients as soon as you make it. By the time we get to this second most basic one, we're already up to a 10% failure rate. By the time we get to some of the most improved basic equipment, we're already talking about potentially a 40% chance to just delete all of your ingredients. Now, why does this matter? Because each of those steel ingots over there, that's not just 3 crafting animations. Instead, you would have to, for example, get yourself some iron bars. To get iron bars, you need iron ores. To get iron ores, you need inferior ores. So you succeed in crafting 3 of those inferior ores into iron ores. Then you get some graphite. You craft that. Then you craft it into iron ingots, which early game has a chance to fail. Later on, this ends up losing its chance to fail. Then you craft that into steel ingots. Then you go and craft that up into the actual weapon that you want to make. But bear in mind, you're going to need 9 iron bars, or rather, hang on, let's double check this. No, you would need to make for that particular weapon. We would need, yeah, you. I'm having a complete brain fart here. I apologize. Yeah, no, you would need to get together 6 iron ingots. So for that, you would need 18 iron ores, as well as 3 graphite. No, not 3 graphite, 6 graphite. I apologize. Again, cold brain. Sorry. Anyway, so you craft all this stuff together. You finally make those steel ingots, and then your crossbow is just like, whoops, sorry, I deleted all your stuff. Whoopsie doodle. What can you do? This crafting system was dumb. It's just straight up dumb. There's no defending it. Like, it was bad. I don't know what they were thinking when they made it. Like, a lot of the stuff, just pacing wise, makes 0 sense whatsoever. Yeah, I don't even have most of the crafting books in this particular playthrough because most of them were hidden off in weird locations. But like, we're talking about cases where you end up getting like a 20% success chance to turn the final end game boss weapon into a generic version that's slightly worse and slightly different for no real actual benefit, just kind of because you felt like it. Like, it's weird. There was just a lot of weird stuff about this, okay? Now, that's not to say that it was completely hopeless, because when it comes to this version of the game, we did get a remake of this version of the game. There was a modder by the name of Rakes that actually did go and created this, and this is one of the reasons that I love this situation that ended up happening. Because if that data loss hadn't happened, we probably would have had a situation where Square might have potentially had an issue with One Vision. They would have had some competition there, and they probably would have had One Vision fans completely crucifying the official release, because there's no way it nearly would have been as detailed as anything that this potentially was. Okay? So we're talking about a case where they took that skill system and they fixed it painstakingly over the course of a decade. Actually, more than a decade. Where we're talking about cases where you don't have just passives around all the time. When it comes to your different characters, that stuff is built into their equipment. Things like, instead of keeping around Fortify, you put on some heavy armor. That basically is like the real Fortify. Oh, you have a heavy shield that somebody is strong enough to go and carry. Now you have a shield that you can go and take a guaranteed stun with. Kind of following from FFT, we have cool stuff like all the crossbows being one-handed, giving them a lot more potential to be used with different classes. And additionally, if the name on a lot of the weapons that look like this end up looking familiar, it's because there's even a bunch of FFT mechanics that ended up getting brought in. You know how in FFT, this is a little thing that I just appreciated recently, but in FFT, if you use any of the percentage scaling health suck skills on the Zodiac bosses, they do dramatically more, okay? And so what happened was the cursed weapons in this particular entry, which before somebody freaks out, the original cursed weapons were retooled into different weapons that you could snapdragon somebody into. But the cursed weapons in this one are essentially the trapped souls of those demons from FFT. They do percentage-based damage that does more depending on how much health something has. So essentially, instead of being the mechanic that kills them, they are now the mechanic that delivers this. It's so freaking cool. Also, not to mention the health suck skills in this game were actually redone to work that same way, where they do the whole percentage-based scaling thing. Which means, for example, somebody like the Terenius, whose health suck skills were basically worthless back in that PSP version, because they had to equip Spellcraft, they had to equip the Augment, they had to rank all of these things up, and then, even then, it was, like, barely doing anything, okay? In this particular case, because it's changed to a percentage scaling thing, they're able to counter a lot of tankier type of units. But the thing is, this version the amount of fixes that it does, the amount of changes that it does, are so all-encompassing that it is functionally its own game. It doesn't even resemble that PSP version anymore. It uses the same mechanics, it uses the same UI, it uses the same, everything that you see here. But you could genuinely package this as like a full price product, and it would be more than worth it because it is a complete remake. Like just as much as Reborn is, it is a complete and total ground up remake of every little mechanic that was there before into something completely new, into everything having another use for it. Like this familiar over here. In order to save on a skill slot, she carries a spell book around in order to use this to go and not only use as a shield, but as a source of MP. She can sit down and read it for MP. She can use it as a setup tool to do more damage with her spells because of the rupture effect on hit. She uses a short bow most of the time, which also has a weakening effect on hit. She specifically equips this type of vest in order to be protected from the kind of lightweight plinking attacks that familiars are usually really targeted by, but also goes for these dexterity and luck boosting gloves on top of this ring over here in order to be really good at evading things and potentially parrying things, along with equipping Deflect over here in order to be able to use that spellbook as a shield. So with high luck and high deflection rating, which granted in her case she's still only at rank 2 because this thing doesn't really come up that often, she still is in a position to use a spellbook as a just shield in her offhand, which is just a lot of fun. Additionally, we saw skills rework to where the actual experience rates and stuff that people are running into matter quite a bit more. They're quite a bit faster. They go up a lot faster. Depending on how rare something is, its tendency to go up faster will vary. We've got cases where, again, because the book she's carrying is technically a manual on herpetology, it's improving her ability to be racist against lizards and what have you. When it comes to your wizards, like we've got abilities that are just all over the friggin' place. Like one of my favorite ones that was added not that long ago was one to cause a map-wide hurricane that goes and throws enemies around in whatever direction you choose. Potentially, again, just like stunning and moving everything across the map, potentially throwing multiple things off of cliffs and what have you. So it basically, the way that I like to put it is that this is the remake of the PSP version. Reborn is the remake of the SNES version. This is the one that makes you feel the dirt under your feet in this particular setting. It's not as focused on the narrative as much as it is focused on letting you experience these cool strategy mechanics, whereas Reborn, which we'll talk about next, is going to be the one that essentially remade itself fully for the sort of narrative and game flow experience, Okay, so and I want to point out, by the way, the amount of mechanics that this thing ends up adding are to the point where even those of us that have stuck around with it for a long time, oftentimes we'll forget that stuff's even potentially going on. I potentially forget just sort of interesting mechanics or what have you. Like, for example, I made a really unlucky golem whose entire point is to essentially go and throw a big rock at somebody's face, turn on Gorge and Lock, and just absorb every debuff on the map, essentially just serving as a debuff for everything that comes his way. But like little things like being able to program your golems with different cores to alter their stats, or for example, you got Rudlum over here, who is essentially a hidden character from one of the other games in the series. Somebody who's just kind of there as a cheeky little nod in the official game, but in this case, he is effectively the best golem guy, the guy that's able to run golem support a lot better than anybody else. But part of that is because he not only can empower them, which causes them to be a bit stronger. The thing is, you don't always want to do this, because that previous skill I mentioned that makes a golem tanky, it also gets overwritten if they put on another tag skill on them. So, for example, Empower would overwrite Gorge and Lock. And so instead he has a secondary option, if that's not what he's looking for at the time, called Rolling Stone, which causes him and the golem to be sped up, meaning that the golem instead gets empowered by being able to attack twice as fast rather than hitting twice as hard. Again, I just love that. And these kinds of considerations for everything across the board, like, God, dude, it's the creativity is unbelievable in this case, okay? And if there was competition between this and the official release, God, that would be heartbreaking. Like, could you imagine if we ended up getting neither of these versions, potentially sticking around because they ended up having the data saved from that PSP version? Like, how disappointing it would be to have that PSP version when stuff like this existed. Like, Dude, I couldn't even imagine. Anyway, so with that being said, hell, we even got classes from FFT like the Geomancer. We ended up getting reworks of stuff from the entire genre. You know, weather wizards that actually fully control the weather. You know, bird units that are freakishly fast. Octopi that feel like they're just a walking force of nature and what have you. Like knights that feel like they're frontline commanders. This one had the time to cook in the oven. Okay, this one had the time to experience all of the things that the fans wanted to experience in something like this. You know, being able to bring in the evasion cloaks from stuff like FFT, to bring in the armor system from stuff like FFT, to bring in weather wizards from that feel more like something like Triangle Strategy there, to just have more ability to interact with stuff in the field, like for example the pumpkins can essentially call down airstrikes for all intents and purposes, going and throwing out long-range jack-o'-lanterns and then self-destructing them, potentially trapping units in a big old net of pumpkins only to then explode them all. Terror Knights being able to blow up enemy shadows, and Knights being able to put down those shadows. You have things like Dragoons coming back from that original classic version of Tactics Ogre, where they have spells and stuff like that. Like, there's just mechanics on mechanics on mechanics on mechanics on mechanics, to the point that at this point I have the party basically capped out at this point. Nearly everybody running a unique class, been using all of them, and all the same, with all of this stuff on hand, it still feels like I'm just barely scratching the surface. There is just that much going on here. But for those that don't want to get this complicated, for those that don't want to get this nitty gritty with everything, this wasn't the only answer. Obviously, we had the official release, and that's when we get to talk about Reborn. Now, you might think, with everything that we just discussed, when it comes to Tor, you might think, oh god, this is not going to reach the levels that the One Vision reached mechanically, and the thing is, it didn't need to. Just like, for example, when you go for a walk on a mountain trail, yes, you can sit down, and sometimes you have those days when you just want to look at every bug on the field. You want to look at every speck of dirt, understand everything in front of you, understand every little speck of grass and whatever else that you see, understand where it all comes from, what the erosion had on the rocks, where all of these trees came from, the climate that they go in, they grow best in. Sometimes you have those days, and other days you're just like, damn, this breeze feels amazing. I love the sunlight on my face right now. There's some birds off in the distance, and I'm just having me a fucking trail walk. And that's Reborn, okay? Because essentially it was reimagined, going back to the series roots. This is essentially the one that decided to take a little bit of a step back, to essentially experience the world as the devs originally intended back in that SNES version, going for what is technically a more simple approach to some degree, a more board game-esque approach. The thing with board games, if you are familiar with playing them to any degree, or maybe if you're not familiar, the idea is that they are going to be different every time that you play them, if a little bit or a lot, but you essentially can play them potentially a little bit differently. The interesting part comes from the interactions that you end up having going through that same exercise every time, right? And so what we see in this case was that they changed the skill system. So I probably should have showed this a little bit going into this. But first of all, they added the ability to actually see what you're getting into, which is, one of hundreds of quality of life changes that they made in this one. In fact, I've linked that video a few times. We'll see if I remember to link it again. But everything about this is just putting you into the environment, into the setting, okay? Like we see when they were talking about adding new environments and new events and what have you, those areas off in the background that are essentially remade biomes, just kind of showing you what the outside of the castle looks like using in-game assets, you have no idea how much I appreciate that. Little things like the movement skills that previously had little to no reason to go be equipped on your soldiers. You'll notice that, for example, now we're wading into the water, because in this particular case, it actually makes sense to go and do that, because your armor is going to have that built in as a standard sort of feature that you can go pop on there as time goes on. Your ability to climb onto rooftops is no longer something that people wouldn't use because they're like, oh, it's just jump +1, who cares? No, it is jump on rooftops. You want this. Swiftfoot, which oftentimes would never leave somebody's skill list, is here if you want it, but also makes people hopefully aware that your distance moved, if we can actually show this here, Okay, I guess we won't see it because she's fast enough. We'll go ahead and show this once their second turns roll around. But essentially, the distance that you move determines how long your next turn is going to happen, along with your equipped weight and how many skills you activated, how you use them, whatever else. So they fixed multiple different things here. So for one thing, you can actually combine everything at once. You could use your entire damn skill bar at once if you want. So, like, let's say before you had a limitation where there was one skill that could be activated. That's that little star that's next to somebody's head. And so, as a result, if you used more than one, you would go and overwrite it. And so sometimes you'd be thinking about some advanced strategy that you were going to go put together, and oh shoot, you went and sabotaged yourself trying to go and put it together, just because you were kind of overthinking it a little bit. So essentially what we see here is that a lot of skills are not only going to be happening on their own, but they're also going to be a situation where they actually can go and stack on top of another. So, for example, the reason that this matters is, like, let's say characters like this Beast Tamer that I have over here, right? So he's got multiple different functions. Before, it might be somebody that would focus on ranking up their ability to train beasts. This time, the ability is just ranked up automatically. There's no ranks to this. It's just as good as it needs to be. It already has its full range. You don't have to grind this up to get your 5 area range. It's just there. You get to do this right from the get-go. You don't have to craft several different layers of lobber and give up one of your equipment slots to be able to use the lobber. You just use this on your Beast Tamer or Fusilier or Lord in order to be able to go throw something, or Ranger, I guess, as well, too. So just certain classes just have this. You don't need to equip the ability to use your spells, you just have 4 spell slots. You don't need Field Alchemy, you just have 4 item slots. And so, for example, let's say over here, I have one of these skills, Vigorous Attack, that I mentioned earlier over here on my Warrior, and so this will give you 100% accuracy, which also means 100% chance to hit with your secondary effect. On my Archer, I have Eagle Eye, which does the same thing for ranged attacks. Mr. Beast Tamer over here has 2 weapons. He's got a Morning Star, which I forgot to actually swap out for his other weapon. I meant to give him a fan. Well, anyways, he's supposed to have a stunning fan with a stun effect, and then this Petrodart has a petrification effect. And so, for example, if he parks himself right over here next to the Archer, he then can go take advantage of that effect triggering in order to guarantee the petrification on his blow dart, meaning that units have a reason to go and stick in formation. Additionally, we have the elements that previously, again in that PSP version, were augmented, but just like the SNES version, are now part of these characters. We have the additional elements from the PSP version, that being lightning and ice, but we also see that these characters are now going to have them innately again. So again, this is honestly more of a remake of the SNES version than it is the PSP version. We see the skills from the PSP version added, but they're added more carefully. Where, for example, let's say somebody like the Swordmaster. Before, they are somebody that would need to swing with their weapon and then spend the points in order to activate Preempt. Now, on paper, this seems pretty good. Because then they would be able to go and essentially pre-attack somebody before they attack them and then take their counter-attack. If they don't equip counterattack, it's kind of pointless. If they don't have the points to use preempt, they basically just eat a hit and die. The thing is, though, one of the things that people would do in the PSP version was to put on another skill called knockback, and so you would preempt, you would knock back, and then you would knock the target backwards. But unless you had the right levels to go and get all of that, I forgot to even mention that all of the equipment and skills and whatever else were level gated before. Instead, you would have anywhere between like 20 to 50% chance most of the game to go and have this thing actually work. So even when it seemed like it was guaranteed, it just wasn't happening. Additionally, this, along with this, would actually overwrite each other. So if you used Mighty Strike for being able to increase your attack, you'd be able to get defense better, through defense better, but you wouldn't be able to preempt. If you preempted, you would lose that offensive bonus. If you tried to stack both, again, you just wasted points and you wound up with one of them. But instead, we have a new skill here added called Fall Blade that guarantees knockback as well as guarantees a critical. So not only is this an attack boost, but additionally, due to the fact that you can stack skills, you can preempt, you can increase your attack, you can also guarantee that it's a critical, and guarantee the knockback at the same time, vastly improving the power of this particular unit, reducing the cost of all of these combined skills from like 100 plus to only 30. Additionally, using a finisher no longer burns your entire bar. It is less than half of what they used to be before. Additionally, your MP and TP bars are combined, so you have less bars to worry about. You don't have to worry about half the classes not even using one of the bars. Like, just every little direction that you look at here, the way that they tokened everything out into this more focused form works beautifully. This is the version that this game needed. If you're somebody that doesn't necessarily have the time to sit there and get as nitty gritty as One Vision does, which I personally know that I alternate between what mood I'm in for those particular entries. Like in most situations, I will just sort of sit down with whichever one is in front of me because in many ways I love them equally. But the way that the automatic skills were implemented here to where they have a chance to activate, but also can basically be guaranteed to activate depending on how you're playing. Where, for example, you can break props, which previously were more difficult to interact with. You can essentially burn grass to go spawn more cards to give yourself more options. Controlling more territory means that you have more access to these different cards to open up different builds in different ways. And so, for example, right here, because our steel stance ended up activating, I feel more confident moving this ninja up to go claim that tile up there. The more territory you have, the more of these particular abilities you can go and set up. So again, it all just like builds and builds and builds on itself in just this beautiful symphony of mechanics that technically you could argue have to some degree less moving parts than they did before, because they did merge a lot of things together. Like this vigorous attack that I mentioned, this is something that used to cost most of your bar to activate, cost a lot of time to activate. Now it is functionally free. It's just on here. It only takes one of your slots. It spreads around to your entire party. It guarantees secondary effects. It also allows you to break past parries. So, like, parrying is what you used to be able to put on just about everybody. What I was talking about using that spellbook for in One Vision, effectively, you can do that with any one-handed weapon in this particular entry for the most part. Some weapons, like spellbooks and staves, will boost your spellcasting range instead. But essentially, what this ends up creating is this fun little situation where you essentially have characters that are able to guarantee that their attacks will land no matter what. Kind of an improved version of concentration from FFT. But additionally, the formulas that all these different weapons use will vary wildly. Like, for example, bows, if not used on the proper targets, as you saw with those last few attacks, will simply bounce off. They just won't really do very much of anything. You had other cases where certain characters, let's say like Terenius before, had the ability to cast debuffs, but due to the fact that they had very few ways to actually go and boost them, they oftentimes would only have like 20% chance to actually hit anything. Whereas, for example, this time around, they're able to do quite a bit more with that. Additionally, things like, let's say, crossbows and bows and staves and stuff like that, they're kind of setup weapons. They have more functions available to them than many other weapon types do, but their basic attacks are pretty garbage in terms of damage. However, as soon as you get to using their finisher skills, they become dramatically more powerful, and this kind of more varied dynamic between your different weapons, again, gives every weapon a more distinct feel. It gives weapons a more particular case to be used. And again, as you saw earlier, there's going to be cases where you use characters with particular weapon types just for the purpose of using those finishers. Because one of the added benefits of applying, elements like they did right here was that it meant that certain skills could be used. It could essentially be used as a way to do exactly what we're doing here. You can take advantage of elements. So, like, let's say right here, this guy over here, he's taking relatively minimal damage because this guy's element is going and preventing him from doing his full potential here, because his water beats this guy's fire. Because essentially the Ogre Battle series in general has a whole lot of sort of like Greek mythology vibes. So in this particular case, you have these cases where just gods are preferring certain units because they follow their religion. That's more or less the kind of in-game justification here. But because it's all color-coded and stuff they're all familiar with from stuff like Pokemon, it's a lot more, familiar. Anyways, though, so in this particular case, not very much there. When it's neutral, it goes up somewhat. When it goes up against this character over here that he's got a counter against, yeah, that's going to do a pretty significant amount more. And essentially, going and stacking these different bonuses are how you end up getting ahead. So, like, let's say in this particular case, we can go put on a Dragon Slayer to completely ignore this thing's defenses, and so we'd be able to do a decent bit more, as well as guaranteeing our stun versus that octopus, preventing 50% of his actions. Now, if we were to put on a Breach, that would end up becoming significantly stronger. And yeah, that's more or less what we're looking at here. That this version is all about how you play rather than how you build. You build for options, not for effect. In something like One Vision, you get to build very nitty gritty in terms of the effect that you want to get. But again, you're oftentimes building for options, but oftentimes you're going to be trying to adapt on the fly with suboptimal conditions. And so, like, let's say in this particular case, I went ahead and used that vigorous attack from before to guarantee the breach on this particular attack. So we now have that target breached, right? And so now let's go ahead and take our archer over here. And this is on a neutral element. So like let's say she's got her bow right here. And so let's say she takes a shot on this octopus, 75. She takes a shot on this one, it's 127. Let's go ahead and say that she wants to go throw a finisher into this whole mix. Now she does 421. Essentially, depending on your different attack types, you're going to have different things that are more effective in one case or another. So like let's say in this case, because ninja magic does not really care about your kind of scaling situation that much and attacks multiple times, this might do like 210 versus this guy. But let's say we go over here, we take a little bit of sidestep to go pick up this card. This has the added benefit of potentially protecting her from being attacked from different angles, and then we go ahead and just kind of go and bully this guy a little bit. That might be potentially more useful in that direction, putting her in a better position, potentially improving her situation overall. But now let's say we take an elemental advantage, we take a character with a guaranteed critical, we take somebody that has an ice element versus this element, and we go and we carve a huge chunk off of his health right here. This building for bonuses kind of thing is just so satisfying to me. I know I'm repeating myself in many ways, but this board game feel to all of this stuff, the way that they change the debuffs and buffs and stuff like that to have all kinds of guarantees to them, it feels so distinct from something like One Vision there. It is built in an entirely different direction. It plays in a very different way, and I love that we wound up in this situation strictly due to the fact that we didn't have access to that particular data from before. The fact that stuff happened to be missing created this perfect scenario where we ended up getting exactly the version of this game that needed to be out there. The version of the game that anybody can sort of pick up and play, that despite its many complications, despite the fact that the story is surprisingly complicated, despite the fact that its mechanics are all over the place complicated, that we still have this version that is deeply understandable, that's deeply replayable, that has these interesting board game mechanics that understand just how to be simple enough to still to have excellent game flow, but still be complicated enough to be infinitely replayable no matter how many times you go through it, you know? Like, this is, to my mind, what needed to be as far as an official version of this thing goes. Like, realistically, something like One Vision, despite its unbelievable quality, is something that most players out there would never have the stomach for. But this, taking those complicated mechanics of that PSP version, distilling it down, I forget if I mentioned this earlier, this is actually something that was canonically there in kind of in-game for over a decade. The actual world map has this Valerian script on there that nobody really bothered translating up until a few months ago, that basically says that this entire game is basically a board game representation of the Valeria conflict. That this isn't just like, oh, you have, you know how you got like chess representing an entire war, and they're like, oh yeah, here's, you know, a sort of metaphysical, not really metaphysical, that's the wrong term for this, but here we have this sort of like metaphorical representation of this war, essentially showing how this particular situation ended up playing out. And you know, we just have this board game version of it, and basically that's more or less what it says, that like this is all a representation of this conflict that took place. And so that additional element just adds so much flavor to this, you know. Anyways, as you can probably tell, my voice is absolutely giving out at this point, so I'm hoping I made my point clear enough, that without that data loss, we would never have gotten the absolute beauty that is Tactics Ogre Reborn. We probably would have gotten an improved version of the PSP version, sure, but we never would have gotten anything nearly as detailed as this one does. Like, I don't believe I even mentioned where we had things like bosses that previously didn't exist, that only exist for the purpose of trolling the player if they did a perfect run of a particular dungeon or what have you. Adding a level cap to the point that just over leveling the game is just not a thing you can realistically do, because your advantages, your breaches, your elements, your stuff like that will make you overpowered if you're paying attention. but it's designed to make people learn the mechanics, to learn to care about paying attention to the world around them, and it again just gives it this beautiful texture. It gives it this nice, just flowy texture. Like essentially, if we're talking about what these different games would be, in many ways, Tactics Ogre Reborn, in my opinion, would be something along the lines of a fine creme brulee. Like it's got that nice silkiness to it. It's got something. It's that feeling that you always want to go back to. It's got those. It's got just enough layers to be nice and juicy when it's properly made, and it's like it just feels good. It just feels good to revisit. If it's something that isn't the most complicated thing out there, but man, it just feels so good to experience. And then you have something like One Vision there, that's going to be more or less like a fine steak dinner, where there's a lot more nuance to all of the individual bits and pieces. It's got a decent bit more meat on there if you've got the time to chew it, and both are incredible in their own way, and it honestly is just a disservice to ever try and argue that there ever should be an argument between them. But it's interesting that for Final Fantasy Tactics, we saw this super safe approach that essentially ended up sticking with the original vision very diligently. But then when it came to Tactics Ogre, we got to see what the developers wanted to show us decades ago. Show us back in that SNES version. Show us what the world feels like when all of these individual soldiers are, just more grunts on the battlefield, more people that will die and be replaced. I don't think I actually mentioned that the life system changed to where we have an FFT-style countdown system, but effectively, anybody can die at any time. If they bleed out, they're just dead forever. Their items drop on the ground, and the enemy can even steal them. If the enemy steals your equipment and runs off with it, that stuff's just gone. Like if enemies steal your loot, you can go and steal it from them. If your units are downed and you revive them, they get an instant turn. Just all these little quality of life things that just add this extra flavor to it. I love it. Anyway, so yeah, I gotta get going. Thank y'all for stopping by, listening to this weird rant, and yeah, I gotta get going. So y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care. I'll see you in the next one, and bye.